Hello.
Hello.
We are back. We always say that.
We're back, and we're here for you if it's your first time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we are the Lorraine Collective. We are Maya and Pat.
Hello.
Or you are Pat, Maya.
Sure.
And if you're watching on YouTube, I am sporting one of our Lorraine Collective sweatshirts. It's the Mama one. We have them in different colors and stuff like that. But I have to say, it is super comfy in the inside. Very, very cozy. So.
But why would you wear a mama shirt on our podcast?
Well, because we're talking about parenting today.
Okay.
That would be why.
Interesting.
So that is why I'm wearing it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just in a community. We have lots of friends right now that are having their first child. And one of them the other day said, hey, on your podcast, could you do the 5 things that you wish you knew when you were new parents? And she literally said it exactly like that. I have a podcast idea for you. She keeps saying that. This one particular friend. And I was like, okay. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about. The 5 things we wish we knew when we were new parents. Before we jump into it,
that was a while ago.
It was a while ago. So Zane is 16.
Yeah.
A lot of things don't change, though. I'll be real. Some things change, but most of them don't. Sorry. Cuckoo clock going off if you can hear it in the background. But all that to say, even though that was 16 years ago that we became new parents, I want to say before we go into this, because one of the things we're going to tell you about is that it's hard listening to everyone else's advice.
Yeah, that's true.
And here we are doing it.
Yeah.
But the reason we're doing it is because there are some things we think might be helpful, but they were helpful for us. And so that is the caveat of going into these 5 things, is that you are going to try things that work for you and your child, in your family, in your situation, and they're going to work. But then other things aren't going to work.
But I think the biggest thing is a lot of times you have to give things a go.
Yes.
You have to try things for yourself in order to know if they're going to work. Mm-hmm. You can't just, I don't know. You can't
just write it off.
You can't write it off and say, oh, that's never going to work or whatever. Don't be afraid to give certain things a try to see if they help or if they work or if they make your life easier, make your child's life easier, whatever it is. You just give certain things a go. But also don't hold those things very light or very heavy in the sense that oh my gosh, we tried this, something's wrong with my child, whatever like that. I think again, the more you try different things, the more you figure out what works best for your kid. Mm-hmm. So. And
when we're saying new parents, we're meaning this is your newborn stage is what we're talking about here right now. And there are so many different stages to come, but this is when you're in the newborn stage. So the first thing that I think that we learned, and that is true, is that you really can function on little sleep in a season.
Yeah, for sure.
Not for long, but if the thing that you are looking at is you're oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? Because it's just a fact of newborns, you're going to have little sleep for a season, is that you can function in it. Somehow.
You can make it work.
Somehow. There are ways to do things to share the responsibilities as a couple that may be more difficult once one goes back to work for certain hours and stuff, but there are still plenty you can share. But know that your body will somehow at the beginning adjust. Now, is it still hard? 100%. It is still hard. But if you that is the thing that you're trying. I am speaking of this from somebody that needs 8 to 9 hours of sleep. I think when our kids were newborns, I probably needed 10 as my body was recovering and everything like that. But somehow, I guess it's function is maybe not the right word. Maybe we should change that. It is more. You can do it, and you have to just keep thinking it's just for a season.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that tags along with that is realizing maybe some of the normal things that you're used to getting done in a day and stuff like that, which we'll talk about shortly. It's okay not to do those things. That's all right.
Yeah, I think certain things you just have to be realistic about. But the idea of getting less sleep than you did before, you definitely... survive is the wrong word to use, but you can get things done. You can do certain things, and in some ways, I don't know, I hate to say it, but you get used to it.
Well, you do and you don't.
Yeah.
I never did. So, but I think going in as a new parent, what I wish I had known, because that was like my personal biggest fear was, well, there were several things, but one of them was the whole sleep thing, was that it doesn't have to be for horribly long, and that somehow
Your body kind of adjusts.
Your body does. It almost is like now. That's why I said it can't be a horribly long time, because your body almost has this adrenaline that it pumps out that helps you get through that. Now, what I will say of like you are going to sleep less, it's going to be hard and that kind of thing, would be that whenever you can, try to sleep. And that's hard because I could not sleep during the day. I'm not a natural napper anyways. And so that was not something, the whole sleep when your baby sleeps thing, like, especially during the day for me, that did not work for me. And so again, here is something that, like, that's not a phrase I'm going to tell you because it didn't work for me, but it might work for you. But knowing that, like, at least for that first month, maybe for the first 8 weeks or whatever, somehow our bodies adjust a little bit. And then the first time your child sleeps for like 4 to 5 hours straight, you will feel like you've had 17 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
It is the weirdest thing, and I don't understand it, but it is glorious. When that first time happens, that you're like, oh, wow, I feel rested right now.
And the sleep thing, again, is only for a season.
It is for only for a season.
Yeah.
I think that would be our number 2 thing. So the first thing is that the sleep is going to be bad, but you can get through it. That is the first thing. I was like, I wish somebody had said, you'll get through it, because instead it was just always how dreadful it was,
really.
as people were telling us, and that we're not telling you it's easy or anything like that, but you can get through it. The second thing would be, in order to get through it, and this is going to be controversial, but again, we're saying what worked for our family, is putting yourself and your baby on a schedule. We are starting to realize this might be a cultural thing too. And so in the States, typically, depending on what the situation is and stuff, if the mom works, that she has if she has any maternity leave at all, she has a very short maternity leave. And so, for instance, when I was still working the corporate world and we had our first child, I had 6 weeks off, and that is all. And I was back at work full time. And so we realized very quickly that we needed to put our baby on a schedule in order for that to happen, in order to hand him off to someone else who was caring for him, in order to know, like, what does this look like for feeding before work, after work, that kind of thing, at the time I was breastfeeding. And so for us, that was really important. I think the other thing we learned is, because we did the schedule thing, and I'm not going to get into all the technicalities of it, I will point you to a resource, but the whole idea behind the schedule that we used, and that, again, we tried some things and it didn't work, and then we came up with a schedule that worked for us. So is that the idea is that, like, the baby sleeps, you wake them up, and that is their awake time. So that is, if I remember right, it was awake, feed, wake them up after feeding, which usually meant, like, we change their nappy or diaper and stuff, and then play with them, and then put them down. And then that was like a rotation like that until you got to nighttime. And then that may look a little bit different, that, like, feeding might be right before bed or that kind of thing. I can't remember how we did that. But then they were down. There was no playing, like, if that makes any sense. Like, it was like feed, maybe give a bath, and right into bed, or read a book or whatever. I mean, that sounds crazy, reading a book to a newborn, but we still did it. And then put them into bed so that they understand this is the difference between, like, daytime and nighttime. And then the feedings and stuff were, like, I think all of our kids, a couple of our kids had some medical things that at first the feedings had to be closer together, but at first it was like every 3 hours. And then when they hit a certain point, it's 3.5 to 4. And, like, you start stretching things. And what it meant is that our kids started sleeping through the night at a certain time. In general, this does not mean it was every single night.
Perfect.
Like, I can't stand when people are like, oh, and then by 4 weeks they were sleeping 11 hours a night or whatever. There's no way that happened every single night. No. Maybe there's once in a blue moon, maybe that happens for a family. But the schedule also made it so that you felt more part of things.
A part of things, because I could take over the schedule, right? Like, I could allow Maya for
I would leave
certain amount of time that she could go. She could, she could do some things. She could. Whatever, as long as, because there was a schedule, I knew how things in the routine was. And so Whether that was feeding or how bedtime went or whatever, how we created those routines with our kids was super helpful because, again, it allowed me into the process.
Well, it allowed you to, like Pat would take when we were in still like a later night feeding time. I would go to bed earlier, and this is when I was breastfeeding. Zane ended up having formula at some point, but like I would pump, and then he would give them a bottle late at night and be like the bedtime person, so he would have extra time with them. So that was the case. It also was super helpful for the two of us to go do something, and so whether it was a grandparent watching or a close friend or something like that, we could literally say they should be hungry around this time. This is when they typically eat. They typically will go back to sleep at this time. And in between we'll play. Now, when you give your baby to somebody else, if they're watching them and you're going out, and especially if it's a grandparent, and they're like, okay, but then they let the baby sleep the whole time on them, that's fine. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. I think it just helps.
Be thankful that they're helping you go have some time without your child.
I think it's just helpful for like confidence for yourself actually to allow somebody else to watch your child, especially as being a new parent, because you're just learning everything at such a fast rate that, if you have something that's set in place, a routine that's set in place that you can pass it off to someone, I think it just gives you a little bit more confidence and reassurance that you can go away and like do something together or whatever it is that it just allows that other person a lot more confidence in knowing what to do if the baby's crying right now. Well, that makes sense because right now it says I need to feed or that they need their nap or whatever it is. Like it's just helpful, I think, in some ways.
And we did this in the day and time where when Zane was born, and even by the time Veda was born, I think there were some apps, but like now there's like all these apps you can track, like feeding time, sleep time, all these different things. And I think that's great. That actually probably would have been very helpful for us. But if that's adding extra stress, don't mess with those things. And like, you can figure it out on your own. Like, you don't have to have an app to do it or pay for an app to do it if you're paying for something. So the resource we used is called BabyWise. I did not follow that 100%. Again, this is where like you can take something and you can, have it and then make it work for you. And so there's lots of stuff in there that we didn't do or I didn't agree with, but we did do the schedule part of it. And what I liked about it, and I know I used literally a version of it that had cassette tapes with you. If it tells you anything, that a friend handed to me. Now I think there's an updated version of it. And the reason why I like it is when it got confusing to us was like, okay, well, now they're this age. Should their nap be longer or shorter? Should we be stretching out their feeding times? Because obviously as they get older, they don't need to eat every 3 hours and stuff like that. And so that was super helpful. Then I literally was like, right, we're on 4 to 5 months now. What does this look like? That kind of thing. And that was super helpful for us to then get on that. All of this to be said, at first, the schedule part it's hard work. Everything's hard work at first. It's hard work, but for us, it was well worth it. Now, I know there are people who are going to completely disagree with us on this, and that's okay. I know there's a lot of people that are very much about like the on-demand feeding or that let the baby create the schedule and everything like that. Again, this is why we said at the beginning, this is what worked for us. When we had our second two, we had our own businesses, and so maternity leave wasn't really a thing. We did intentionally take some time off. I took some time off and stuff, but then again, it was super important for me when I was going out photographing and stuff like that like Pat knew this is their general schedule, again, or if we were having somebody else like watch and stuff like that. It was really, really helpful. Yeah. And so use that resource. We're not experts in that. That thing that I liked about
aspects of it just worked for us.
There are things that I liked about that book too, that we used it for all three. I had that copy and I always went back to it and refreshed and went back and looked at it. The thing that was helpful for us is in general then, we did have some kids that had some health issues, and it touches on that too. And so like there are accommodations obviously made for different things, and frequency of feeding and all that stuff, but I cannot say enough about that. Again, you've got to try it out and see, but that was the resource we used. Yep. And I know if you think differently, there's no hard feelings.
No, it's okay to think
differently. Just telling you what was helpful for us and caused less stress in an already stressful time.
Yeah.
On top of that, since we mentioned people watching our kids, would be number 3 is it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, ask for help, especially if things are confusing. I think about the idea that, Maya, we come home with a baby from the hospital and we're just like, okay, like we're expected to know what to do now. Like,
I mean, we did take some prenatal classes, but
we took classes.
Doesn't prepare you.
Maya read books and like all that kind of stuff, but it's still like, what? Like, okay, now like we're in charge of this little person now, and we're expected to kind of know what to do. And I think that's really unrealistic, right? Like, it's okay to ask people that have done it before, your parents or whatever it is, or whatever, group or community that you draw from. Like, it's okay to ask for help, and that there's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't feel less of a parent because you don't know what you're supposed to be doing or how to care for your child in the best way. Like, it takes a lot of experience to understand how to do a lot of this stuff.
And that's more on the advice part that I think you're talking about. I do want to put a caveat of when you ask for help and advice, take it with a grain of salt and try things.
Exactly.
But also then there's the asking for help of like, I have no sleep, I need help.
Yeah.
Can you come over and be with my baby?
Mm-hmm.
I would be, and sometimes people don't know how to help because we all receive those things in a different way. So, like where one friend may be helpful that you make them a bunch of meals, another friend, cooking might be their way that they like rest and stuff like that. And so what might be more helpful is you to come over and hold the baby or, feed them or something while they cook, because that actually is their time then to like refresh and that kind of thing. I know one of my friends, it was super important for her when she finally could, for her body to like do yoga and stuff like that. And so one of our other friends would go over there for 30 minutes every day so she could go into another room and do that and not have to worry about like the baby and that kind of stuff interrupting and that kind of thing. And then it's asking for help of like, we still need time by ourselves or that kind of, and asking for help in ways that you don't feel like your house has to look a certain way, or you don't feel like you have to have things put together, if you will, or that kind of stuff, that you can just say, hey, look, I need help. Can you come over? And someone can just walk into your home and it's okay, because especially if they've been a parent, they've been there before. Even if not, if they're a good close friend and family member or something, they're not going to judge you in that. And I think that's the hardest thing as a mom, at least, with that. And I think the whole thing with like what you were saying with like asking for help and advice and stuff like that, sometimes because, we said you will be able to function, but you will be tired. And that does often mean that sometimes the things that seem like a natural, obvious answer to something don't come to us quickly. And so two examples that are funny from us with Zane is like Pat was feeding him in those night times, and then all of a sudden Zane wasn't taking it anymore, and it was really weird and we couldn't figure it out and stuff. And I remember standing in front of our cupboard having a phone call conversation with my mom, and I was like, look, he's not taking the bottle anymore. My mom was like, he's older now, he drinks faster, doesn't he? And I was like, well, yeah. And she was like, then change the nipple size of the bottle. And I was like, oh, like we got stuff with our firstborn child that we didn't understand what it was used for. And so when people bought us different sizes of nipples,
really?
Like it goes like 1, 2, whatever, like newborn,
sense.
I was like, oh. And as soon as we did that,
it was fine.
It was fine. Yeah. But I could not reasonably come up with that because I was tired. Yeah. Another one would be Zane was colicky, and it was pretty miserable for the first 6 months. Until we figured out some solutions. But the only thing that would quiet him down was the sound of water. And so I
cringe just thinking about this.
Our water bills must have been so expensive. I would literally sit in the bathroom and run the shower or the bathtub because it would make him, he'd like just lean in and listen for it, and he would be quiet. And from the time of like 5 to like 11 p.m., he was screaming. I mean, I kid you not when I say constantly. And so that sound would make him quiet, and I would just sit in the bathroom, and sometimes like I would rest my head on the toilet paper holder and like start to fall asleep. And then again, I told a friend, she was like, what are you doing? You know there's CDs that make noises like that, right? Of like rushing water, the sound of rain, all those things. I say CD. Wow, that really does show how old we are. Mm-hmm. Now you could go on Spotify and find it. But at that time, I was like, oh, that is such a good idea. And she's like, don't worry about it. I'll bring you something over. She brought a CD over, and like we could set him in his crib, and he was quiet during not 100% of the time. But a large time, we'd just put the speaker right next to his crib, and he'd be quiet. So again, sometimes that help of reaching out and saying, what am I doing here? Like, it sometimes is so obvious, and once someone says it, you're like, of course.
Yeah, I think just accepting help too. Like, that's a big one. Just
Yeah.
being able to accept it. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. We're not trying to win a badge here. And when you're a new parent, that has to go to the side for
Yeah.
sure.
For sure.
Number 4 would be that everyone's child and baby is different, including your own if you are going to have more kids.
Yeah.
And this goes with a little bit that help thing while we're saying ask for help. Sometimes it's hard because everyone, again, will have their own opinions, their own methods. Or I think I remember your grandma telling us that all of her kids were potty trained by 9 months.
I think so.
Maybe they were. I'm going to guess they probably weren't. I don't know. She was pretty efficient, so maybe. Yeah. But all that to say that everyone's child is different. And so what works for one and what works for another probably isn't going to be the same. We had Zane, then we had Jude, and a lot of some of the things, like Jude doesn't, now he loves the sound of water, but the sound of water wasn't the thing that worked for him for sleeping and stuff like that. And so they're going to be different things that work for them. The schedule for us worked with all 3. It looked a little different because Zane was colicky. The schedule thing was so easy with Jude. Was not like that with Zane. It was a lot of work and took a lot of work to get onto a schedule. With Jude, it was fairly easy. With Veda, she pushed back on some things actually, but it was fairly easy as well. With her, it was more like she was difficult feeding and stuff like that. So there's going to be something different about each of them. And that's where you have to figure out what works for your family, what works for your baby, that kind of thing is definitely, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get caught up in the comparison thing and then realize, especially if you're having a child at the same time as a friend or whatever, and your friend their child's doing this and that's not working for your child, and you get kind of frustrated and confused, and you maybe push too hard into that thing, and because you're comparing so much that then maybe there's just something else in that works differently for your child than their child, so I get it's just a reminder of that what works for your child is not going to necessarily work for others, and what's working for your friend's kid it might not work for you. So, and
it's not even what's working,
and that's okay.
It's also the milestones. I think there's so much pressure, and it seems to still be the case in talking to friends of like, by this age I should be doing this, by this age I should be doing this, da 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 da. None of our kids followed that schedule.
Yeah.
Whoever came up with the schedule.
Even got, hit their percentiles.
Yeah, our kids were tiny babies. And so that was really hard and caused a lot of stress when Veda wasn't even on the charts for a while, but she was growing. She just wasn't on the percentile she was supposed to be and that kind of stuff. And she's fine.
Yep.
But there was so much pressure put in that. And like each of our kids, one kid did a milestone thing like walking way before any of our other kids, and the other one then was like way on the other end that we were starting to get a little worried, and we were having to look at experts and stuff like that of like, do we need help in this and that kind of thing, or speech or eating on their own or crawling, or one of ours never crawled, they butt scooted the whole time. Like there's all these different things. There's a great episode of Bluey, which I wish I knew. If you don't know what Bluey is, please go watch it now, regardless if you have kids or not.
Especially if you're a new parent.
Yes.
Just watch Bluey.
And if you're any kind of parent, it's great and it's wonderful for kids too. But there's an episode of Bluey where they're talking about this of like another kid in a child class was doing something, and frankly, there are going to be some parents that put that stuff out there like, look at my child, they're doing this thing. And I don't think they mean by that. No. I think they're just proud of their child, but it can be really hurtful if you're self-conscious about something that your baby and your child isn't doing yet, that it can feel mean, and
well, it just
hopefully
feels like
that's
you're
not their
not doing
intention.
Your job as a parent.
Yeah, or you feel like something's wrong. There are things to be concerned about at certain points, and that is when you can talk to somebody about that. Like we said, our one child wasn't crawling or wasn't walking yet. We were really concerned. When we asked and did some more digging, and our pediatrician observed, they realized it was because, frankly, it will just be Veda walked very late. And they realized part of the reason was she had no reason to go to an object, because all she had to do was point and make a noise, and her brothers would bring it to her. So it was an issue with her crawling, it was an issue with her standing, and it was an issue with her walking. And when the pediatrician had us hold her up, Veda could squat and sit in a squat forever, and she was like, she's perfectly fine. She just has to have an object she wants to go get. And we had to tell the boys, stop grabbing things for her. And within a few months, she was walking.
Yeah, she was
so
fine.
Sometimes But again, we did start to seek out that we're like, okay, this does seem, so that's when you want to talk to a doctor, and they will tell you some do this late, some do it, that kind of thing. And there are other cues that may be something you need to pay attention to. And so don't seek out Google. Don't seek out, other parents necessarily. You can. We did say help, but if it is something you're actually worried about, actually talk to a professional about it. And our pediatrician so many times said to us, it's not a big deal. They will do it eventually. No. And then when there was a concern, why don't we look at this a little bit more closely and let's observe some things and see if maybe we do need a specialist of some kind to help in that area, or if that's something we should look into more. So that's where we mean every child is different. Every child is going to do things different, and they will for sure do the milestones differently, and it is okay.
Yep.
The number 5 thing is that you don't need all the gadgets.
No.
You won't have space for all the gadgets.
As much as I want all the gadgets, you don't need the gadgets.
And when we say gadgets, this comes from everything to the fanciest bottle you can think of, to the fanciest buggy or stroller, to
or wipe warmers,
to, and again, we're not coming across of judging of any of that stuff, but
I guess in our experience, we didn't need any of that stuff.
No. We ended up with a lot, or the toy that they have to have. There's always that. Our kids were spread out enough that there was a new toy or thing you had to have. This was developmentally, they don't have this toy, they're not going to develop. Most of our stuff for all 3 kids was from Zane, and it lasted, most of it lasted, and it was perfectly fine, and they did fine. But especially if you do, in the States, this is a big thing that you register for baby stuff. Here in the UK, you'll often go and to a store, and they'll kind of tour you around in many ways, you need this, you need this. And of course they're going to tell you need it. But when it comes down to it, we have to realize that forever, babies have been born and brought into this world and raised without all that stuff. And so that is something to keep in mind. What are the things? Think about how, when you're choosing this stuff, how do you function as a family?
Yeah.
For us, we didn't need some fancy stroller when we lived in the States because we only used it every so often. If we had a baby here now in London, I would spend more money on a buggy and a stroller because we would use it almost every single day.
Yeah.
And we would need it to be lightweight because it's going up and down stairs and on buses and tube and stuff like that. And so think about your life circumstance and then realize, do I need this thing or not? There's so much, and you can end up having so much stuff that then it's overwhelming because you have a lot of stuff and you don't have space for it. And then you feel like you have all this stuff and what am I supposed to do with it and that kind of thing. Let people buy you some things as gifts too. Hopefully, you can say to somebody, these are the things we haven't gotten yet and I would love to have. And that kind of thing may happen. Like I said, in the States, a baby shower is often a common thing. And so think about the things that really, or that have multifunctions.
I just think it's always funny because people get you these I think it more tends to end up being novelty things for your kids or for the situation that people are oh, that's just funny to buy, I'll get that. I can think of somebody bought us these little teepees.
PTPs.
They're called PTPs, that when you change
a boy to put this over the area, so a lot of times when you're changing, if air hits that thing, man, they start peeing. And they're called these PTPs, and man, somebody bought us a pack of them. And we tried them, and it just would fly off. It wouldn't even stay on, and we just needed a washcloth. It wasn't a big deal, little things like that you're seriously, didn't. But it's a cute gift to buy.
It's a funny gift, but at the same time, it's not practical whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's okay to not hold on to things. Don't feel guilty you have to hold on to things. We had, there were some outfits that people made for us that were absolutely precious, but they were not practical for the kids to wear. And we took pictures of them in it and sent it to them and said, thank you so much. But the kid, Jude's skin was super sensitive. And so some of that stuff, it was adorable, but he couldn't wear it. It would make his skin break out and stuff. And so there are just different things that it's hard sometimes when you're being given things. But also, again, that is where some of the comparing to other people and what they have, think of what is right for your family. What are the
And your
things
circumstances.
in your space that you're living? What are your circumstances? All that. Think of those things. And you can find list after list after list of things that you have to have that are the best things to have for your baby. And they're each going to say something different. And they're each probably going to feature the most expensive thing. And that is where, like we bathed once they could sit up a little bit, our kids love taking their baths in the kitchen sink. They adored it. And so like even things like that they just, there was something about it because there was a window usually nearby or things like that. They absolutely loved it. Even when we moved here, Veda was 2 and she still always she would like ask, like she'd want to get her feet wet in the kitchen sink and she could still fit in it because she was tiny. So there are even funny things like that sometimes you can look back at what generations before you did and realize, maybe that thing's not important. Now, there are some things that are more advanced now that I would have loved to have some of the monitors that they have now and stuff like that versus what we have when we could creepily hear other people's babies through our monitor, like our neighbor's baby. Sometimes we're like, that's not our baby's cry. And you'd hear another man's voice and it was monitors picking up each other. I mean, ugh. But I think that's much advanced now.
I even think like we had like, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking it's something different, but I felt like for like 2 of our kids, they loved like one of those swings, but then one of them didn't. And then we just used the bouncer and it was fine.
Yep.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah. So
and
like,
again, if we lived in London, we would have never had one of those swings. It would have taken way too much space.
Yeah.
But we had space for it in our house and the way that our house was laid out and stuff like that. Our house wasn't really that big, but it just was laid out differently. So all that to say, like, you want to make sure with things that you're getting obviously are safe and that kind of thing. There's plenty of things you can get used, and it's not that big of a deal to have it used. There are other things you want to do your research if it's used. But do not feel the pressure to have all the latest and greatest gadgets because so many of it you'll realize, why do we have this? Because we're not even using it. There were lots of things we got rid of after we had Zane that we said we're not keeping this because we never used it.
Yeah.
Or he went in it once. And it was not helpful or those kind of things. And that is okay. So let's do a quick review.
Yep.
The 5 things we wish we knew as new parents. Number 1 was that, yes, you're going to have little sleep. It's for a short season and that
you'll make it.
You will survive. I promise you will survive. It will be very hard though.
And only for a certain amount of time.
And it's for a certain amount of time. Yep. It will be hard, but you can do it. I promise you can do it. Number 2 is thinking about putting your baby on a schedule and doing some research in that. Number 3 is it's okay to ask for help. In fact, for sure, ask for help. Ask for help in the areas that you don't like doing things either. That's all right. You can ask for help in that. Number 4 is that every child is different. And so certain things are going to work for some kids that won't work for others, as well as the milestone things and marker moments are going to be different for every kid too. Yeah. And number 5 is you don't need all the fancy gadgets. You don't need all of the baby store.
Yeah, that's very true.
You don't need all of it.
Yeah.
That is our quick 5 of what we wish we knew as new parents. Please do ask us questions of anything. Again, we are not experts and we're not baby experts or any of those things. This is just what worked for us and for our family. And we pretty much use these things for all 3 kids. And they were very helpful for us, and we hope that it's helpful for you as you step into new parenting. It is the most challenging part of, well, I shouldn't say. Each stage of parenting has its own challenges. I think the hard thing, especially when you're a brand new parent with a first child, however that child has come to you, it's that everything is very new. Everything is so new. Yeah. You question everything. You really are hard on yourself often and stuff like that. And so because of that, it is one of the most challenging seasons of parenting, and you have so little sleep. It's challenging, but there's so many beautiful things in it. And right on that season, gosh, when they start smiling, like, and all these different things, it's wonderful. And so just know that welcome to parenting. That's part of it. It is challenging, but it's filled with beauty as well. And we just wanted to give you that encouragement.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope this was helpful, and we will talk to you next time.
See ya.